all gonna die.
And here we are. Welcome back, guys, to AHS 1984. We're on episode 3, Slashdance. Tell me in the comments below what you thought about this week's episode. I was actually a bit surprised in a good way. Usually when they have these twists in any of the seasons, sometimes they kind of backfire for me. And it's not that I didn't expect it or I didn't see it coming. It just wasn't worth the while of a twist. And to be honest, this time I thought they did a pretty good job with some of the characters. And even though I had a hunch something was up with a few of these guys, it was still a good surprise, a great twist, and that's really what I want to talk about with this episode primarily. But this episode as a whole is still about the continuing story of these counselors, these kids that are running away from both Mr. Jingles, Richter, who escaped from the institution, and Ramirez, the Night Stalker, which just dawned upon me as an actual serial killer. I didn't realize that till now after seeing his name, but that was interesting as well. But that wasn't the interesting part of this episode. As I already said, the interesting part was talking about these backstories of one of these characters and finding out there's a bit of a twist and there's just this web of conspiracy of more than one person that's involved with these killings. And we learned about Ray Powell, and his backstory is interesting, but you just find out pretty much that he is a unreliable friend. He's a jerk with his friends, and you can see that from the backstory of when he's in the fraternity and he pretty much let one of the other students die. He kind of does it again with his friend Chet, who leaves him in the pit there, and he just runs off. So he is definitely an unreliable guy. He does it once again, and he faces the consequences when he gets impaled by the motorcycle. So what can I say? The guy kind of deserved it. But I think the person we really need to talk about, I think the most important piece of information that we were given this episode, and probably it takes up the bulk of this episode, is learning about Rita. Or so we thought that was her name. We find out she's actually Donna Chambers, and she is a psychology student trying to get more information out of Mr. Jingles, and we find that in the past, before all the events had occurred, she was the one that let him loose from the institution. Now, I actually enjoyed that entire sequence of when she goes in there, interrogates him, tries to find out what's going on in his head. It was very Halloween-like, just like it was with Dr. Loomis in the Halloween films. But it also reminded me a lot of Mindhunter on Netflix. If you watch the show, I definitely recommend you check that out. It's full of forensic, about research, about finding out what goes on in these people's heads. And that's kind of like what was going on in those sequences in the institution. But this woman takes it a step further by actually releasing him, letting him escape, and as she puts it, lets him go into his own habitat to see how he would really act upon these instincts. But this woman that now goes by the name of Donna, I was suspecting something was up with her, but not to the point of this. And I told you this is a great twist. I think this is a good twist, and it's one that I'm willing to accept. Whereas other seasons, there was some that wasn't what I was expecting, but I wasn't satisfied with it. So I think that this little conspiracy with all these other people that have something in mind of what they're doing, I think it's kind of interesting, but we can't really say much until we get through the next few episodes. And that leads us to the cliffhanger when you find out Montana is actually a part of this too, after she kisses Ramirez and she says you were supposed to kill her. I mean, who was she actually talking about here? Was it Emma Roberts' character? We don't really know who, but it seems that there's just more than these killers that are involved in this whole circumstance. I think, though, overall, I did like this episode. The one thing I didn't really care about, though, was those kids that were impersonators of Mr. Jingles. Now, I do like that they were kind of dressing up as him, kind of like to give off that legacy that he had as a serial killer, kind of like the same way we kind of glorify Michael Myers or Jason or anyone like that from the movies. But it just seemed a bit of a waste to have characters like that just running around trying to prank these characters in our show, and it seemed kind of like cheap scares in a way. That was the only thing that really bugged me about this episode. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, it's just something I could have done without, but otherwise I do like where the show is heading. There's something that people have brought up to me in the comments about how on IMDb it gives off the titles of the episode and gives us idea where it's going. I try to avoid that, and this being for the obvious reason, I like to be surprised, whether it be shows or movies. So if there's ever a time on this show or anything else I talk about, if I'm questioning it, it's probably because I didn't look it up on IMDb or wherever it might be. But overall, I did like this episode. I like where it's heading. We're still on that path where I think it might go in a direction I might be satisfied with, but we're not at the halfway point, so we'll see where it's going. But thank you guys so much for listening and hearing my thoughts on this. Don't forget to tell me in the comments below what you thought about this week's episode. I will be back next week to review episode 4, and don't forget to consider subscribing to hear from me talking about movies and more, where anything is possible.